A pro-Palestinian encampment enters its second week at the University of Toronto. We're live with the very latest, and we have an update from the school.
And we're following a labor dispute at the Nestle chocolate factory. This is where workers have walked off the job after contract negotiations broke down.
And sirens blared across Israel to mark Yom HaShoah, the first Holocaust Remembrance Day since the October 7th terror attacks that triggered the Israel-Hamas war.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at Noon. I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Lena Latifat. Thanks for joining us. We begin at the University of Toronto this afternoon. The school appears optimistic about finding a peaceful resolution to pro-Palestinian encampments that have taken over King's College Circle.
And CP24's Courtney Hills has the latest there. Courtney.
Good afternoon, Lena. Bakari. That's right. So we're actually inside of the encampment here at King's College Circle at the University of Toronto. Day 5, as you mentioned, you can see several tents, dozens. We just heard from some of the demonstrators here, well over 100 now, and well over 100 people who say they are not going anywhere until the university meets some of their demands. Now, I just had a chance to speak with some of the demonstrators here, asking about this statement coming out from the University of Toronto, suggesting that they see a way forward. I'll start by sharing what the university has to say about things. So this is part of the statement we just received into our newsroom. It says our goal remains the same: to find a peaceful conclusion to the unauthorized encampment as soon as possible without the risk of violent confrontation or physical injury. Members of the U of T administration met in good faith with U of T student representatives of the individuals in the encampment over the weekend. Our discussions have been constructive and we see a way forward. Now, as I say, I just spoke with somebody who was here since day one. One of the demonstrators asked about the idea that they see a path forward. They don't necessarily feel the same way, and that's because they say during these conversations over the weekend, one of those conversations happening just yesterday, they discussed more the actual encampment. So, for example, they talked about some of the fencing changes that were made. They've opened up some areas of the fencing here, also sanitation, so ensuring there's access to washrooms. But they say that the school is still not addressing some of their concerns when it comes to wanting to see the school divest in companies with military ties to Israel. That's one of the demands they have made. And they say until the school acknowledges some of these demands and starts to make progress on that, they're not going anywhere. So we are going to continue to gather more reaction to this. I also want to mention, guys, the school says they've received some reports of and concerns when it comes to assault and hate speech. They say they've put forward 4 reports over to the city, or excuse me, the Toronto police on this. No specific details on that. We have also asked some of the demonstrators about that. They say they don't know anything about it. They have not talked to police. They haven't had any details to it. So we're going to see if police have anything to say on that and see if the school also has any further details on that. But again, we're getting a lot of reaction to the latest day 5 now of this encampment. Many of the demonstrators say they are not going anywhere until the school meets their demands. Over to you.
All right, CP24's Courtney Hills live at the University of Toronto this hour. Thank you, Courtney.
And pro-Palestinian protesters at McGill University say that they are prepared for a second week of demonstrations. Organizers say that their encampment has become a tiny city, complete with dozens of waterproof tents, a library, and a stockpile of donated supplies. And pro-Palestinian activists, they've also set up tents at the University of Ottawa and the University of British Columbia campus in Vancouver. Opponents have said that the protests are illegal. It makes some Jewish students feel unsafe.
And after a week of protests, an encampment at UCLA was cleared out by police over the weekend. At Princeton, some students have launched a hunger strike until their demands are met. In Chicago, a protest at DePaul University is growing, and now that includes counter-protests.
A new report says that 2023, it saw a record amount of anti-Semitism in the country. This was on the rise. B'nai B'rith
Canada released its annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents today. It says there were nearly 5,800 last year. That's the largest tally the group has ever logged and represents an average of 15 incidents a day. It is also a more than 100% increase from 2022.
In 2023, we entered a period of crisis. 8 provinces or territories saw the number of anti-Semitic incidents in their jurisdiction increase by greater than 50%. And across Canada, there was a 135.7% increase in acts of online anti-Semitism.
The organization is calling for a comprehensive review of the state of anti-Semitism in Canada.
And sirens blared early this morning across Israel to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. Many shops were closed, but those who were out and about, they halted their activities and they stood in silence to honor the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. This is the first time Israel has marked the day since the October 7th terror attacks by Hamas that sparked the war in Gaza.
And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and senior officials attended a Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony at Israel's official memorial in Jerusalem. They observed 2 minutes of silence before Holocaust Remembrance Day is one of the most solemn dates on the country's calendar.
A Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony, was held last night right here in Toronto. Members of the GTA's Jewish community gathered in North York last night to remember the victims, honor survivors, and reaffirm the commitment to preserve the memories and lessons of the Holocaust. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke at the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa today and says that dark period in history must never be forgotten.
We'll get to what the Prime Minister said a little bit later. Also making news, hundreds of workers at the Nestle plant in Toronto, they're on strike after rejecting a tentative agreement their union reached with the chocolate maker. Unifor issued a statement saying 461 of its members, including machine operators, bar packers, shippers and receivers, walked off the job. It says the workers want improvements to the pension plan and rejected a 2-year freeze on a cost of living adjustment. Nestle says it doesn't expect the strike will have an immediate impact on the availability of products in stores.
Issues are the pension, our wages, and the cost of living. I mean, the cost of living right now is just incredibly crazy here in the city, and then for the company to turn around and say they're going to freeze the cost of living on us is just ridiculous. We have about 61 to 70 P0s, which are not making the regular wages like everybody else, so it's a fight for everybody for fair wages. And like I said, with the economy the way it is, I think we're entitled to get the cost of living, a little bit of wages, and on our pension.
Inflation is up 18%. Cost of living is up about 44%. We have some people here at the lower end of the wage gap making, let's say, $18, $19. With the increase, they will increase about 54 cents every year for the next 3 years. And that's also with no pension increase. And some of them without the possibility of being able to move up and get a pension period.
Now, the company issued a statement, and that reads in part, Nestle Canada's priority is to work with the union to achieve a collective agreement that ensures that operations at our Toronto plant remain competitive in an increasingly challenging marketplace. Our goal is to have employees back at work.
Well, Leaf fans spent yesterday recovering from the Game 7. This was the loss that happened Saturday night.
And if you're a fan of Canadian hockey, and the good news is, the silver lining, I guess, that there is still some on-ice action that you can get behind. CTV National's Scott Hurst joins us live with more on this. Scott, it's good to see you. I know you're probably pretty heartbroken, but which Canadian teams are left? What are their chances of going all the way to the Stanley Cup?
Good afternoon, Lena and Bakari. Leafs fans may be taking a few more days to recover from that disappointing Game 7 loss in overtime. It was so close once again, yet another disappointing way to end the postseason after yet again a promising regular season and ousted once again in the first round. But here's the silver lining for Canadian hockey fans. As you said, there is still a chance the Stanley Cup can come back north of the border for the first time in 30 years. There is an all-Canadian matchup out west. This will be against Vancouver Canucks against the Edmonton Oilers. That series gets going on Wednesday in Vancouver to start off the second round series. And this is the first time these two teams have met in the postseason since 1992. Both finished relatively close during the regular season, although Vancouver did have a slightly better record, and they actually beat the Oilers all 4 times they played in the regular season. However, Edmonton had an easier time in their first round matchup, finishing that game up faster than the Canucks did against Nashville. That series took 6 games for the Canucks to win, and so now this is a heated rivalry that will only get more heated as they get set to play a second round series. And of course, that means one Canadian team will move on to the Western Conference Finals, and they won't have to go through a Stanley Cup defending champion because the Las Vegas Golden Knights were ousted by the Dallas Stars, who then play Colorado in the next round. So at the very least, guys, one Canadian team will be one step closer to the Stanley Cup final after this series.
Okay, but Scott, then there's the PWHL. Those playoffs get underway this week.
Yeah, there is playoff hockey in Toronto. PWHL Toronto, the top-ranked team in the league, going into the playoffs. 4 teams making the inaugural playoffs for the PWHL: Toronto, Montreal, Boston, and Minnesota. This caps off a fascinating first regular season for the PWHL. Lots of great attendance numbers, really good TV numbers, really laying a groundswell of support in their first year. And here's where things really get interesting in the playoffs, which begin Wednesday here in Toronto. As the number 1 seed in the playoffs, guys, Toronto gets to pick between the 2 bottom teams who they want to go up against in that first round matchup, which I said goes Wednesday. And if you're interested in checking that out, tickets for that series, at least the first 2 games, they go on sale later this afternoon. So despite disappointment for Leafs Nation, there is playoff hockey here in Toronto, which gets underway on Wednesday, and it's been great hockey to watch all year long.
It sure has. All right, Scott Hurst reporting live from our national newsroom. Scott, thanks so much for this.
Thanks, guys.
A potential strike between WestJet and its mechanics union appears to have been avoided. A statement from the airline says a tentative deal has been reached with the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association. WestJet had issued a 72-hour lockout notice on Saturday to the union, which represents around 670 aircraft maintenance engineers and skilled trade groups. The union had cited wages, outsourcing, scheduling, and layoff protection as key issues during negotiations. Terms of the deal have not been made public.
Okay, but Lena, something that is public is traffic. And for an update on that.
Always public, all right.
Yeah.
Always public. Sometimes you want it to be private, right? So you can get to where you need to be.
Or so you can just cry in your car in peace.
You can still cry in your car in peace. It's, torturous. But if you're making your way out this afternoon, guys, it has been a busy go already to start the afternoon drive. We'll start with some problems adding to the always slow drive on the 401. So this is the eastbound 401. Just as you make your way through Kipling, crews on scene of a stalled vehicle. It does have that right lane as well as that right shoulder block, so that's adding to a bit of your slowdowns. Now, further east on the 401 through Bayview and the Express was getting word of a collision that had the left lane blocked. Just going to check out the camera that's a little bit further back. No, I'm not seeing the problem through here, but definitely seeing some heavy delays. Then on the westbound lanes of the 401, we are dealing with issues. This is a stalled flatbed truck. It's in the express lanes through Leslie. Center lane is occupied. And just checking out your drive on the Don Valley Parkway, starting to improve. Just a little bit of light traffic now as you make your way north and southbound between Lawrence and the 401. I'll send it back to you.
Ajwa, thanks so much. A funeral is taking place today for 2 grandparents who were killed in a crash on the 401 along with their grandchild last week. The couple and their 3-month-old grandson died in the multi-vehicle collision in Whitby. The crash happened after a liquor store robbery suspect entered the highway driving the wrong way while being pursued by police. The child's grandparents were a 60-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman who were visiting from India. They are set to be cremated in Toronto. A funeral for the baby will be held on Wednesday.
And Canadian workers are reporting that they often don't have enough time to do health and safety training. The National Workplace State of Safety Survey found the greatest challenge to improving health and safety was lack of time for training. Medium and larger size companies appear to be having the most difficulty carving out time for their employees to complete health and safety courses, with many citing understaffing as an issue. Labor Minister David Piccini discussed some new measures to improve workplace safety, including ensuring washrooms on every site are clean and maintained, and bringing more women into the trades.
Currently, only about 4% of workers in Ontario's construction industry are women, and we've seen a 116% increase in building trades, which tells you how much more we still have to do. And they deserve a government committed to ensuring that their needs are met on the job site. To deliver on this government's ambitious plan to build Ontario, we're going to need more hands on deck. But without more women in the trades, we'll have one hand tied behind our backs. And I refuse to let this happen.
Piccini also introduced protections to address harassment in virtual workplaces.
It is 12, 15, 16 degrees. Coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, recent comments from Donald Trump coming under fire. We'll have more on that and the latest on his legal troubles. That's next.
Independent MPP Sarah Jama has been removed from the Ontario legislature.
Member for Hamilton Centre is warned. Sarah Jama, you are named. The member is currently not eligible to be recognized in the House pursuant to the Order of the House adopted on October 23, 2023. As a result of being named for the remainder of the day today, the member is ineligible to vote on matters before the Assembly, attend and participate in any committee proceedings, use the media studio, and table notices of motion, written questions, and petitions. You must leave the chamber.
Jama was named by Speaker Ted Arnott for wearing a keffiyeh in the legislature, barring her from participating in legislative proceedings. NDP MPPs Joel Hardin and Kristen Wong-Tam, they also wore keffiyehs and walked out of the legislature. The NDP has pledged to defy the keffiyeh ban in an attempt to overturn it.
The irony is, prior to being removed from the chamber or told to leave, we engaged in a moment of silence around the Holocaust. And while we can spend time to recognize genocides of the past, we struggle as members of this House to recognize genocides of the present. And so wearing the keffiyeh is a testament to the fact that Palestinians have the right to return, they have the right to exist, and they do not deserve to be genocided. And wearing the keffiyeh, especially in the midst of the keffiyeh ban being reversed in the rest of this building, shows that there was no merit to this ban in the first place.
We're prepared to stand up for the human rights of all people in the province of Ontario. And for let's be honest, like, this is going into its 7th month where people are heartbroken in all of our communities, who've lost dozens of family members. And in the midst of that, we have a situation in which Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim people are told, you have to check your culture at the door. And when Kristen and I had occasion to talk to the House Leader, Mr. Calandra, we implored upon him to work with us. This is something that can be resolved.
Arnott says members, staff, and visitors wearing the keffiyeh will be allowed into Queen's Park, but cannot wear the keffiyeh in the legislature.
A witness testimony continues today in Donald Trump's hush money trial. The trial now in its 12th day. Prosecutors have set the stage for an even deeper dive into the events and people involved in what they say was a scheme to influence the 2016 presidential election by buying and burying negative stories. He is accused of falsifying internal business records to cover up hush money payments, including a payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, and recording them as legal expenses.
Trump's also coming under fire for comparing Democrats to Nazi police. It happened over the weekend. In a 90-minute private speech to donors at his Mar-a-Lago estate, Trump said that Democrats are running a Gestapo administration. The comments, they came after he repeated his complaint that the indictments against him were politically motivated. The White House responded with a statement accusing Trump of echoing fascist rhetoric, lunching with neo-Nazis, and fanning debunked conspiracy theories that have cost police, or rather brave police officers, their lives.
And let's get right to political reaction. For that, we bring in CTV News political analyst Eric Ham. Thanks so much for joining us. How dangerous are those comments, Eric?
Well, for Donald Trump, it's just par for the course. We know that the Biden administration has certainly taken exception to them, and we know Donald Trump is under fire for them. But again, this is the par for the course for Donald Trump, and it's what's to be expected.
What is going on with the gag orders, violating gag orders, possible fine? What is going on with that as it relates to what we are hearing now? Because, I mean, kind of doesn't add up.
Well, Donald Trump is, in the recent violation, it was for comments that Donald Trump made about the selection of the jury, saying that he felt that 95% of the jurors were Democrats and that they moved too swiftly to actually impanel the grand jury. The judge, of course, slapped him with a $1,000 fine, saying that it calls into question the integrity not only of the trial, but also of the jury, and creates unsafe conditions for that particular jury. Once again, he threatened Donald Trump with the specter and possibility of jail time if, in fact, these violations continue. And of course, many are wondering if that will actually happen during this trial. But what we're seeing play out today is that, again, this trial is moving very briskly, very fast. In fact, there is the expectation that this trial could be done and we could actually see a verdict by the end of the month, given how quickly it's moving. And, of course, all eyes are waiting for that moment, if and when, of course, Michael Cohen will actually testify.
You're also following new polling data, Eric, that shows that Donald Trump isn't moving to the center, and that's really hurting his chances to be president. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we got new polling data from two new polls out over the weekend. The ABC News poll showed Joe Biden leading Donald Trump 49-45, and the NPR Marist poll showed Joe Biden leading Donald Trump 52-47. What's interesting about both of those polls is they poll likely voters. So they're moving more narrowly and more targeted in those people who are actually going to vote, number one. But number two, what we see among those likely voters is Joe Biden is now actually reaching or past the 50% approval rating mark, which is something that we haven't seen from this president since early in his presidency. And so what that speaks to is perhaps what we're seeing with this trial with Donald Trump off the campaign trail, with Joe Biden ramping up his campaign visits, that now this trial is beginning to show an impact. And it's also showing signs of trouble for Donald Trump as we move through this election cycle. Now, again, these are ebbs and flows, and these polls are just a snapshot in time. But what we're seeing now is not only is the race beginning to tighten, but what we're beginning to see is that Joe Biden is actually gaining momentum, and he's doing so while Donald Trump is stuck in a criminal courtroom.
And also last week, Hope Hicks was on the stand. She cried. Any big fireworks expected this week?
Well, we don't know who the witnesses who will be forthcoming, but now we see Jeffrey McConney is on the stand. And this is actually someone who was actually been given criminal immunity in this entire case. And he also testified in the civil trial against Donald Trump. And he said the reason why he retired, he was simply tired of actually being constantly accused of criminal and legal entanglements with Donald Trump. And so now he's actually on the stand breaking down for the jurors how the actual hush money payments, how the actual violations actually were carried out. And so that is what the jury is hearing from now. But still, there needs to be more evidence that directly ties Donald Trump to these actual payments. And that is what we're waiting to see.
All right. CTV News political analyst Eric Ham, it's been good to join you. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks, Eric.
You bet. Thank you.
Right now it's 12:24, 16 degrees. This is CP24 live at noon. More news straight ahead. Stay with us. The Speaker of Ontario's legislature says that the keffiyeh will be allowed inside Queen's Park, but will uphold the ban inside the legislative chamber.
A pro-Palestinian encampment enters its second week at the University of Toronto. We're live at the school with the very latest on what student protesters are saying and with what the school is saying.
And we're following a labor dispute at the Nestle chocolate factory. This is where workers have walked off the job after contract negotiations broke down.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at Noon. I'm Lena Ladifat.
And I'm Bakari Savage. Provincial leaders are gathering for a ceremony to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. Let's listen.
Created, and afterwards I used to take a rucksack and half a dozen bottles, and my father gave me addresses and for those Jews that could still have money and pay, and that's how he made a living. This all finished in July of 1942. when placards appeared on the wall and they said there's a lot of people who are unemployed living in the street. By that time, there were close to 450 to 500,000 people living in this little area, 70 streets of 770 streets of Warsaw. So can you imagine what kind of quagmire that was? People were living in the streets. They opened the synagogues. They opened the halls. There wasn't enough room for anybody. Hygiene was terrible. Water was not always available. Electricity was not always available. People started dying in the streets. This little boy saw every day the Jewish burial service walking with wooden carts and collecting bodies from the streets by the hundreds, and taking them to the Jewish cemetery where they dug a huge pit and they used to throw them in without any prayers, without anything, like you collect garbage in the streets. Now, can you understand that? I didn't understand everything, but it imprinted in my mind. And it was only later on that these things came out. At that time, I was emotionally dead. This little boy was going on 9, 10, 11. We spent 2.5 years in the Warsaw Ghetto. And we were there when the deportation started. They didn't call it deportations, they called it relocations. All the people that didn't have work, all the people that didn't have a place to stay, that they were sick, they were going to go to green areas and have food, and they gave them 3 kilo bread for the journey with marmalade, and people went, they started going, to the station, because they were hungry and they didn't know. They thought, well, maybe that's what we're going to. We're going to work in places. But within weeks, we knew that Treblinka was there. It was a death machine. And people smuggled themselves from there. And they came back to the Warsaw Ghetto. My father, maybe because of his experience of having been beaten by the Germans, he hid us. He never, ever allowed any inspections of paper, because the Germans used to play games. They used to issue papers for people. They had factories in the Warsaw Ghetto and outside the Warsaw Ghetto. So they had these factories, and they used to issue papers for those that could still stay in the ghetto and those that couldn't. But every few days, they would make a blockade of a few buildings, and they would say, everybody come down to inspect papers. And then if you had green papers, they said, no, these papers are not anymore valid. You have to go to be relocated, to go to Treblinka. And then we lasted until the 19th of April, the eve of Passover of 1943. And we went down to the bunker because between September there was a lull until January, and then there was a bit of a resistance in January, so they didn't stay very long. They stayed only a couple of days. So we stayed in that bunker for 3 weeks while the uprising was in place. Then they caught us because they built the bunker underneath the front of the building, which was destroyed by a bomb during the war in 1939. And they put air vents, camouflaged, inside those ruins. Somehow or other they found them, and they told us, if you don't come out in half an hour, we are going to throw gas bombs, and you're going to die in the bunker, and then we are going to burn, because they decided to burn the whole ghetto. And we're going to burn you, even if you start running out afterwards. We give you half an hour. So we came out. And then they took us to the Umschlagplatz, the place of deportation. And they pushed us into a room also about, like a schoolroom. It used to be an old Jewish hospital and a Jewish school. And they pushed as many people in as possible. And we stayed there for about 24 to 36 hours. We stayed the day, the night, and the next day until they pushed us into the wagons. And you can imagine what kind of a hell was in that room, because the guards were standing at the door and they wouldn't allow anybody to come out. There wouldn't be any food, any water or anything. Women with children, with babies, pregnant women, old men, young men. You couldn't even lie down. You could either kneel or stand. And after that, they pushed us into the wagon. The wagons had, little windows with, barbed wire screened. My father pushed us. My sister, by that time, it was my mother, and we survived all this time of the Warsaw Ghetto deportations. So I had a twin sister, Sabina, and my father pushed us into next to the window so we could breathe, because they put so many people you could hardly breathe inside. And then we started going, and we finished in a place called Majdanek, which was, at that time, I didn't know it was a death camp. I knew Treblinka was a death camp, but I didn't know anything about Majdanek. So I'll just finish off by telling you what happened there. We arrived in Majdanek, and they pushed us onto a field full of sand, a sandy field. And they started separating men from women, women with children, women without children, children on their own. And it was enormous, it was mayhem that you cannot believe. There were dogs, they were shooting, they were screaming at you. It's impossible to actually, the scenes are in front of me, but I can't project them. Maybe in the future, you know, with IT and so forth, you'll be able to project it from your brain, but not at the moment. So I can only tell you about it. And then my father must have known something. So he said, you must say, I was 11. And he said, you must say that you are 5 years older. So he took me with the men. I was quite tall. My sister was about the head, it was my twin, but she was a head shorter than I was. So my sister was pushed with the children. And then she saw my mother. She ran towards my mother. They tried to chase her, but she had this blonde braid. And she ran and she hugged my mother. And from that time on, I, who have a photographic memory, I cannot remember anything about my sister. All I can see when I think of Sabina, I see the braid. Then they took away the women and the children and everybody. We were the last ones. They chased us into a barrack, and they told us to undress naked, run with our hands in the air. And my father was running in front of me, and there was a man with a white coat with a stick and pushing people right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. And I came into a room, and I saw shower heads. And shower heads in the Warsaw Ghetto, we knew they tried to fool you to the last minute. Gas is going to come out. So I started, being a religious boy, I started saying my prayers because I knew I was going to die. So I had to say my prayers before. But in my case, water came out. And after that, they chased us into a barrack, and they gave you those striped, you know, prison clothes with that striped round hat and wooden clogs. And I went out, and I thought that my father must have been also alive, that my mother was alive. This is a place where you work. You don't die like Treblinka. But I couldn't find them. And the next day or the day after, and I can't remember exactly when, I found that they were murdered the day they arrived. I went through 6 concentration camps. I was sold by the SS as a slave laborer to a German concern called HASAK, acronym Hugo Schneider Aktiengesellschaft, the shareholders of which we found out after the war are all the banks that exist to this day. And I was working in ammunition factories where they worked you to death. They had selections every day. We were in the forests and camouflaged by, built originally before the war. And then I was sent from, as the Russians were coming near, I was sent to another place in Poland, and then to Buchenwald, and I was in Kolditz, which some of you must know what Kolditz is all about. They had a famous castle, and there were a lot of prominent people incarcerated there. And then I was liberated on the 8th of May, actually on the last day after a death march, where half of us that went out from Kolditz, we were in Kolditz making bazookas, Panzerfaust. They used to call it a Panzerfaust. And we walked, 750 arrived out of 1,500. Half of us died on the way. And we arrived in Theresienstadt, and I was liberated by the Russian army on the 8th of May of 1945. Thank you for listening, and please.
We've been listening to the story of Holocaust survivor Pichas Guta, which includes staying in a bunker for 3 weeks and going between 6 different concentration camps. Before that, we heard a violin solo. This is as provincial leaders gather to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day.
And we'll have more on that ceremony throughout the afternoon. Staying at Queen's Park, the Speaker of Ontario's legislature now says the keffiyeh will be allowed inside Queen's Park, but says he will uphold the ban inside the legislative chamber. Also at Queen's Park this morning, independent MPP Sarah Jama was removed from the chamber.
Member for Hamilton Centre is warned. Sarah Jama, you are named. The member is currently not eligible to be recognized in the House pursuant to the order of the House adopted on October 23, 2023. As a result of being named, for the remainder of the day today, the member is ineligible to vote on matters before the Assembly, attend and participate in any committee proceedings, use the media studio, and table notices of motion, written questions, and petitions. You must leave the chamber.
And Premier Doug Ford has called on the Speaker to reverse the ban. We're going to have more on this coming up throughout the day. For now, we'll take you live to the University of Toronto. The school appears optimistic about finding a peaceful resolution to pro-Palestinian encampments that have taken over King's College Circle.
And that's where CP24's Courtney Hills joins us with the latest. Courtney.
Good afternoon, Bakari and Lena. That's right. And we are actually standing in front of the encampment here in King's College Circle. We'll give you a quick live look at the area. You can see dozens of tents, well over 100 that have been set up here since Thursday last week. That was when the pro-Palestinian demonstrators say they breached the fencing here that was set up on campus, made their way in. Demonstrators continue to join this movement. And what's new, we're hearing through the University of Toronto conversations happening between student representatives here as part of the demonstration and the school. Now, I want to share with you in part what the school has to say about those talks. This statement reads in part, our goal remains the same, to find a peaceful conclusion to the unauthorized encampment as soon as possible without the risk of violent confrontation or physical injury. Members of the U of T administration met in good faith with U of T representatives of the individuals in the encampment over the weekend. Our discussions have been constructive and we see a way forward. Now, we've been speaking with some of the demonstrators here about those talks. They confirm the talks were had over the weekend, one as recent as just yesterday, but they say when they were talking, they were mainly focused on the actual encampment, mainly when it comes to safety concerns and sanitation. They say some of their demands weren't talked about, and that's their priority at this time. I want to let you hear from Erin, who has been here since Thursday morning. Okay, so Erin tells us that she has been here since Thursday morning. As I say, she said when it comes to the talks that she really wants to focus on the demands, many of those demands focusing on the fact that they want to see the University of Toronto divest from companies with military ties to Israel. She says they have attempted to set up meetings with the president of the school or any administrative staff to, again, focus on some of their demands. They say that's not happening. The focus seems to be on the encampment and safety and sanitation concerns. So we'll work to turn around that clip for you. I've also talked to some faculty members, guys who say that they are happy to be part of this demonstration and they feel it is time that the school should address some of their concerns. I also want to mention the school says they've received reports of assault and hate speech, and as a result they've put forward 4 reports to the Toronto Police on that. We have reached out to Toronto Police to say if they know anything about those ongoing investigations. We haven't heard anything. I've also asked some of the demonstrators. They say they don't know anything about those reports either, and that the police haven't been here as part of any sort of conversation or investigation. So again, this is day 5, and speaking with the demonstrators here this afternoon, they say that yes, these talks were had with the University of Toronto over the weekend, but because the school isn't acknowledging and going forward on their demands, they say they're not going anywhere. Over to you.
All right, Courtney Hills reporting live. Thanks so much for this, Courtney. Over in Mississauga, Carolyn Parrish, she is well ahead in the race to be that city's next mayor, according to a recent poll.
The Liaison Strategy Survey conducted last week shows Parrish has 28% support among all voters. That's a 13-point lead up on her closest competitor, the Peak of the Merla. Alvin Tejo rounds out the top 3 with 13% support.
The biggest group of voters that people are going to be targeting is always seniors, because seniors, statistically speaking, most likely to go out and vote. And among voters who are over the age of 65, Carolyn Parrish has a really big lead. It's actually even bigger than her overall lead in Mississauga. So this actually bodes really well for her to be able to outperform the polling, depending on how the different campaign organizations shape up. Deepika Damerla in second there, as you know, she does a little better there than the overall survey results as well. But for Carolyn Parrish to have a big lead in that cohort, that's certainly a group that the other candidates need to target in these closing days.
The margin of error for the poll is plus or minus 3.25%, 19 times out of 20.
Right now it's 12:49, 16 degrees. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. More news straight ahead on CP24 Live at noon. Stay with us.
Labor Minister David Piccini discussed some new measures to improve workplace safety, including ensuring washrooms on every work site are clean and maintained.
And that brings more women into the trades.
The biggest group of voters that people are going to be targeting is always seniors, because seniors, statistically speaking, most likely to go out and vote. And among voters who are over the age of 65, Carolyn Parrish has a really big lead. It's actually even bigger than
Currently, only about 4% of workers in Ontario's construction industry are women, and we've seen a 116% increase in building trades, which tells you how much more we still have to do. And they deserve a government committed to ensuring that their needs are met on the job site. To deliver on this government's ambitious plan to build Ontario, we're going to need more hands on deck. But without more women in the trades, we'll have one hand tied behind our backs. And I refuse to let this happen.
And part of the minister's announcement included mandating that construction sites must have menstrual products on hand. And joining us live with more on today's announcement is Lisa Lerone, president of Canadian Association of Women in Construction. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. What does that mean to you? How significant do you think this is for women in the industry?
Oh, this is hugely significant. I'm also president of RSG International, which is a company that's involved in the road construction. So we do have a number of women on our job sites. So in order, if you think, just the bare necessities to be able to, put your menstrual products even in a garbage can or have the ability to have a clean washroom, they're just basic necessities of life. So it's about time that the government is stepping up and maybe working in consultation with associations like CAWIC, the Canadian Association of Women in Construction, so that we can start to allow women to be more in a more inclusive work environment. And that goes as well as up to harassment and discrimination. I understand that that's also part of being what's tabled. And I think it's very, very important. As they're saying, 50% of our workforce is women, and only 4% are actually in the skilled trades. So we have a long way to go.
A lot of people might be asking themselves the question, how has this not happened already? Why has it taken this long? Do you feel that way as well?
I absolutely do. I mean, I understand there weren't a lot of women in construction, but we also have trans women, and if you understand from their perspective, that's probably one of the most unsafest places that they have. So even to provide clean facilities for everybody deserves that. Women, men. I just can't believe in 2024 we're still talking about that, as well as to not. If we want to attract women, obviously you have to have menstrual products available. What do you do if you're on a job site for 8 to 10 hours? You can't be expected to run to the local coffee shop to be able to go to the washroom.
Absolutely. Such an important conversation. We're so glad that you're having it with us today, and so looking forward to these changes. Lisa Lerone, president of Canadian Association of Women in Construction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving us a voice.
It's 12:55, 16 degrees. This is CP24 Live at noon. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Actor Bernard Hill, who had key roles in Titanic and Lord of the Rings, has died at the age of 79.
Hill played Captain Edward Smith, one of the only characters based on a real person in the 1997 tragic romance film. He joined the Lord of the Rings franchise for the second film of the trilogy, leading his people into battle as Theoden, King of Rohan. Hill's agent says he passed away on Sunday morning.
And we have breaking news out of the Middle East. Hamas says that it has accepted a ceasefire proposal put forth by Egypt and Qatar.
Keep it here on CP24 as we keep a really close eye on this breaking news out of the Middle East. We'll have more information and reaction coming up at 1 o'clock. Stay with us. And thanks for watching CP24 Live at noon.